Good afternoon and welcome to episode 99 on Overdose Live and Chill. I'm Yestin Keys. I'm the Managing Director for Overdose Southeast Asia, based here in Singapore. And today I'm joined by our guest, Rupert Dyer of WhatIF Foods. We're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Obviously, we'll do a short introduction to Rupert in a second. But if you do have any questions, just drop them in the comments. And we'll be very happy to jump in and answer them. So Rupert, welcome.
Thank you, Yestin and Overdose, for having me on. This is really exciting. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to have you. And I see you're broadcasting live from somewhere near my house.
That is correct, but unlike you, I'm not in the penthouse. I'm down on the second floor, so but I'm here. That is correct, in Singapore.
Just for any bosses watching, it's not really a penthouse, I hasten to add. But anyway, we can talk more about our neighbourhood a bit later on. So obviously, you and I know each other, but also you and us as Overdose, and you know each other as well. We've worked together in your previous life, but you're now recently commercial director at WhatIF Foods APAC.
That's correct.
Awesome. So perhaps you can just maybe tell us a bit about what that entails. You know, what about WhatIF Foods, and obviously what the role entails.
Yeah, sure. So WhatIF Foods, it's a really cool company, but it's new. It was founded sort of around 2013, 2014, but more in the product development space. And now in the last 12 to 18 months, the business has put product into market in Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and just recently in North America. And what they're focused on is designing, developing, and delivering food products that are regenerative. So they're really focused on sustainability in the environment, but take it one step further and putting it more in than sustainability and about regenerating, rebuilding things. And maybe we'll get into a bit of that later on if we've got some sustainability questions. And really what they mean by regenerative or reimagining categories, food categories bit by bit, is by developing products that are beneficial for the farmer, beneficial for the environment, and beneficial for the consumer, so healthier. So we really pick on those three pillars when we're looking at products or categories to reimagine and regenerate, across the farmer, the environment, and the consumer as well. So I've just joined. And, if we want to get more into what if and what we do, why we do it, how we do it, which I think is really interesting, more than happy to come back at a later date with some of my colleagues as well and dig deeper into them. And but if we touch on sustainability and regeneration later on, which we might, I can delve into a bit deeper on that with my previous experiences.
Sounds good, and I promise not to grill you too much on WhatIF in that case, but sounds like an awesome role and an awesome company. And obviously, I think some of the things you talked about then, if you look at some of the challenges faced in the world today, incredibly pressing issues. So it must be really exciting to helping to tackle some of those issues. But before you got to WhatIF Foods, perhaps you could tell us about your career journey to date, and you've had quite an interesting route, and from your maybe not so humble beginnings in Queensland. But tell us a bit how you got to Singapore.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'll go back a little bit and I'll tell it. And if I'm boring everyone, yes, and just pull the pin. But I'll try not to make it that boring. I have moved around a bit. I'm not a linear sort of progression with my career and what I've done. As a kid, I moved around Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne. So I was never really one to settle down. But I finished university, the University of Sydney. I did a Chem-Eng commerce degree. And unlike a lot of Aussies, I chose not to go down the well-trodden path of going to London, pouring beers and trying to create a career in finance, banking or marketing. I just didn't do that. I instead decided to go to Beijing and learn Mandarin. And that's what I did. So it was 2003, the start of 2003. And China at that time, if people may or may not remember, they just entered the WTO, became a member. They had just been awarded the Olympics, the 2008 Olympics, and they were really just starting to have an impact on the world. And obviously since then, it's now, 20 plus years. or 20 odd years, China's had a significant impact on everything that we touch and feel. So I was there relatively at the start, but I also know a lot of people that were there in the early 80s. So I went to Beijing and learnt Mandarin. Then SARS happened, the thing that happened before COVID, 2003. So the university shut down, and I had to return to Australia, which I did. And during that time, I got my first job as an engineer. I worked for a recycled paper mill in Western Sydney, out at, God, I forget where it is, but way out west in Sydney on the way to Penrith. And I worked as an engineer there, which was really cool. My first job, real job, I guess. And I learned a lot about manufacturing, continuous improvement, working with people that are on the shop floor. One thing that I never forget from that experience is never underestimate the people that work on the shop floor. Often they know more, they can give great insights, and more than us who are got all our fancy degrees or sitting in the office. Never lose sight of the whole team and everyone that's contributing. And that was a really strong thing I learned as a young engineer at that mill. So that lasted about a year or so. And in 2004, I had this pull, I had this yearning to get back to China. And I left that paper mill, that company, Visi Paper, and went back to China. And I signed up again in Beijing to a private school, language school, 4 hours a day, learning Mandarin, teaching a bit of English. And that lasted about a year. In 2005, I said, okay, I need to restart my career again. And I was offered a job with a startup in Nanjing, which is about 2,000 kilometers south of Beijing, or a 2-hour flight in Nanjing. And I was given the job to run a magnesium alloy factory. So wow. It was a startup. The factory was just being built. There were French, Canadians, Chinese, Aussies. It was owned by an Australian, on the ASX. And we were making basically magnesium alloys for mag wheels in cars and, mobile phone parts and things. I had about 100 odd people reporting through to me in the team. And the only time I'd seen magnesium was in chemistry class, where we burnt it. So I knew that if it caught fire, we had to run far. So that was really interesting. My kids still think that I worked for Apple at that time, because I said we give stuff to the mobile phone industry. I was a long way from Apple and any of that. But so that was my first role. It lasted about 2 years. And I got another opportunity that I thought was really cool. And that was to be a general manager of a bit of a startup, French owned, in China, in Nanjing, making solar panels, so PV electric solar panels, where they would import all the materials for it, we'd put it together and export and install them around Europe mainly. So again, that was a really interesting experience, a new factory, new people, and also gave me insight into the overall business and the commercial side of things, which I hadn't touched on that much in my previous roles. So I got to exhibit around Europe and North America and Southeast Asia, and do all of that kind of cool stuff. But as luck would have it, the GFC hit. I was exhibiting, I think, in Greece and Spain, maybe a month or two before everything went a little bit pear-shaped there with the GFC, and the solar industry at the time started to consolidate. So I felt that maybe there wasn't a role for me in China as an expat in the solar game. And I also felt that maybe it's time to get back to Australia. I'd been in China off and on probably 7 years. And so I decided to take the role with Sunrise, where I've been for the last 12 and a half years. I might pause there, but before I get on a bit of the Sunrise journey, if there's any questions or anything you want to add on that, Yeston?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting journey, and kind of like a well-traveled, I guess, path, not so well trodden, but it must have been fascinating being in China, 20 years ago, as you said, entering the World Trade Organization for the first time, being almost not quite at the start, but early on in that incredible kind of rise to being, the world's second largest economy. Obviously, in your, I guess, quite recently, as we'll come on to Sunrise in a minute, but quite recently, you were spending time in China. what strikes you as those kind of standout differences between the beginning of that, or early on in that transformation journey, all those years ago, and what you've been seeing when you've been there recently?
Yeah, I think, look, at that time, 20 years ago, China was certainly in a period where they were learning, wanting to learn how to do things differently, how to do things better. They were inquisitive for sure, and certainly ones to pull in information. Yeah. And companies, West foreign companies, were more than happy to go in there and work with them and share experiences, technology, etc. And that, everyone's well read on that, and there are a lot of experts on that, more than myself, that we know how China's grown by putting themselves in the manufacturing space, in particular exporting products, helping with keeping a lot of the Western world fed with respect to new gadgets and relatively cheap products. And now that's certainly changed. And China itself has changed the way that it wants to present itself and develop economically. So change away from being a manufacturer to being a supplier of higher technology products, goods and services. Also, contributing to that debate around everything that is the world, geopolitics and sustainability and all the rest of it that we all know about. But there's been a significant shift, and I think we might talk about it a little bit later, but just pitching up to China now and saying, hi, I'm a foreigner and here's some stuff you might be interested in, doesn't cut it. They're really, really connected and really very much on the forefront of a lot of things that we know around the world.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And obviously, I guess the last time you went to China was in your role with Sunrise, and we were fortunate to work with you while you're in that role. Obviously, we did some work around the healthy snacks range. Obviously, I still buy the rice crackers, still a fan of those. Yeah, tell us a bit about Sunrise, because obviously you covered a lot of ground there. Lots of time spent on looking at things like kind of cross-border trade and entering new markets and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I joined Sunrise at the start of 2010, and ended up having a 12.5-year journey with them that took me to Papua New Guinea initially. So I didn't get to Australia. I got halfway with my wife, who I'd recently married, and I'd met at that wonderful magnesium factory. So Papua New Guinea for 2.5 years, running supply chain. Then I managed to go to Australia. I lived in regional Australia, in the Riverina, where all the rice is grown, on strategy for a bit over a year. I then went to head office in Sydney and ran the planning department. And then I moved into a commercial role about 5 years ago, and was fortunate enough to get that opportunity and all those opportunities at Sunrise. And it's a global business. They operate and export to over 60 countries around the world, and they touch both retail and food service and industrial, and quite a complex web of supply chains and things to consider. And really, it's an agribusiness with a strong brand and consumer focus. But tying all those things together certainly comes with its challenges. And I think the learnings that I got from there were added to the learnings I had before, and hopefully now taking that to WhatIF and beyond.
Yeah, and I think what would be interesting for a lot of people watching, especially in the ANZ markets, who would be thinking about, maybe they're doing really well nationally, but they're thinking about exporting into Asia, and I guess vice versa. Companies that are maturing in Asia and looking to go overseas as well and tap into new markets. Sunrise was a fairly dominant brand in Australia, right? I mean, I remember you telling me that when you go to the rice aisle and it's pretty much all Sunrise. What are the kind of challenges or considerations when you take that as a start point, and then you look to go into a market like China, which is obviously huge in comparison to Australia, and Sunrise being I guess a challenger brand.
Yeah. Well, China and the challenges of that, I'll touch on that, and then maybe broaden to the rest of sort of Southeast Asia and things. I think and a little bit speak in general terms, but use my experience. We were looking at China from selling our value-added sort of snack products, our low GI products, and also some, looked at the infant cereal space as well, and had some exposure with that doing cross-border trade. So we're both in China and bricks and mortar and online, and also some cross-border. I think, with China, like I said up front, is you can't just pitch up there now and say, hey, look at me, I'm a foreigner with this wonderful foreign product, you should take it. And we used to push things onto China and the Chinese consumers, and the partners there were willing to take it and help you push that onto the marketplace. You can't do that anymore. You've got to create a pull. So the challenge for anybody going into China, and I would say this is now across Asia in general, I think the Vietnam, the Philippines, the Indonesias of the world, you can't just push things on these marketplaces. You have to create a pool. So, in my view, creating a pool, you need product or service that is serving a functional need, right? There needs to be a problem to solve, or a gap in the market. It has to have functionality, right? That is somewhat unique, but also excellent. It can't be sort of halfway there. You've got to be really good at what you do. And the other thing is, so that's the functional aspect. The other thing is creating emotional connection to the brand and the product, particularly the brand. And that comes around, you've got to be really crystal clear on what you do, but most importantly, why you do what you do, right? And communicate that, because you'll then create an emotional connection to the brand. Marry that with your functional benefit, then you're halfway there. Yeah. And you're more likely to be successful. And then look, the third pillar is then to get the right partners and the right people involved, right? Partners take time. They've got to be 100% aligned. And that's partners from, distributors, importing agents, marketing agencies, people that run your TP function. They need to be aligned. And then, that takes time, and a lot, it's been very difficult with COVID. So anybody that's trying to do China in the last 3 years in particular, you'll know better than I would how difficult it is. So you really need to make sure that you build those connections, and often that needs face-to-face time and visiting and really looking people in the eye and spending the extra time. So I think that's really key as well. And it's been my experience across South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, is to spend time in those countries with those people, not just around the boardroom, not just talking about business, but going beyond that and getting to know people personally. And that's a real part of Asian culture in general. And you need to be aware of that, particularly when you're starting to build relationships and form that third pillar around partnerships.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because obviously, particularly when you look at markets like China and Japan, there's a lot of focus on not only the kind of perceived cultural differences, which are most certainly there, but also the differences in terms of media landscape, distribution structures, the role of things like Tmall and Alibaba, etc.
Yeah.
But obviously, ultimately, it still comes down to relationships and building trust and FaceTime. So, it's interesting that's still important despite all those other perceived differences. And I'd imagine that some people are probably still overly focusing on things like, okay, well, how do we get on Tmall, rather than perhaps focusing on just fundamentally building those relationships first and foremost.
Yeah, I think so. What most people see is the end result. Yeah, and brands that have been successful, you'll look at them and you'll know about them because you've seen the end result. But what you may not know is what's gone on behind that, and the foundation, the building blocks, and the time that it's taken to go there and to do that, and to understand, yes, that foundation building that I spoke to, I think is similar across countries here in Asia. But then the end result that you see with the different platforms, the different route to market, you need to consider them. I mean, Japan, for example, everywhere else in the world, physical distribution, you have a distributor and they can go to all retailers generally. In Japan, it's the other way around. A retailer says, I will only work with these distributors. And that often goes back several hundred years of relationships. So you need to understand simple things like that. The Philippines and Vietnam, they're packed, they don't have as much disposable income. So their just pack sizes are often smaller. Different flavors, different tastes, change. In Australia, you might have a shipper that goes straight onto the shelves of Coles and Woolies, and that's great for Coles and Woolies in Australia with a big box, but in Hong Kong and Singapore, it doesn't work. And in Hong Kong in particular, it's small.
Yeah.
Hong Kong, you're doing your distribution and you pay per movement. So if you've got a small box of little snacks moving around, that's a lot of cost. So you got to maximize that box that you're going to be moving around for size and value. So those little things really help you then build the foundation to make you cost effective, to make sure everybody, all your partners are making money. And that's ultimately going to be the success, because, you know, commerce will always override things. And if your partners are unhappy and not making money, then ultimately they'll stop supporting you, and that'll mean the end result. So those successful brands you see at the end, the pointy end, online, in stores, they built that foundation and considered all those things across the supply chain.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And I think earlier on we touched on COVID briefly, although we managed to mention SARS first, which is good. Otherwise, often when I do these chats, all we do is talk about COVID. But yeah, and just having come back from the UK, obviously COVID almost seems like a distant memory. But you know, it's great to hear on the news this morning that in Asia there's a bit of economic upturn off the basis of the easing of those restrictions that we've seen across the region. But during the pandemic, for you in particular, I guess moving like large quantities of rice from Australia to other parts of the Asia Pacific region, there must have been some fairly challenging situations for you to overcome trying to get product from A to B.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I wasn't in the planning role for the last few years. I've dodged that bullet. I've dealt with drought and I've dealt with floods, which we can maybe get onto when we talk what's now with regards to supply chain. But look, during the pandemic, yeah, it was certainly a challenge, and we weren't different to anybody else, particularly if you're trying to move things from A to B. You might have multiple touch points, and you're using containers. You're not, you know, and it's a lot of quantity, a lot of volume. So, you know, a couple of things that we try to do with our partners was, you know, is there an opportunity to build buffer in the supply chain? Can you hold a little bit more inventory? You got to weigh that up against cost to hold product versus the missed sales opportunity. A couple of things as well, you know, could you shorten the supply chain? I.e., instead of buying Australian rice, could we switch you to Southeast Asian supply? But, you know, rice ain't rice. It's like wine. It's, you know, it's paired and it's nuanced and somewhat selective, subjective. So, but where we could switch, we did. And that was the benefit of the business and its network of different supply options, which, you know, no doubt other companies that had that did that. And, you know, the other thing we noticed was, you know, rice is a staple. People kept consuming it. And it generally was about the same, about when, you know, there was panic buying, but overall roughly the same. What changed was the consumption from out of home to in home. You know, restaurants shut down, and that was particularly noticeable in Australia, and also here a bit more in Asia. But with the you know, the tendency to use Deliveroo and all of that a bit more in Asia, less cooking at home, you could still do all right through the restaurant chains that were delivering, you know, takeaway. So in Australia, you know, with the strong retail brand that Sunrise had, with the value-added products that they had around ready-to-go meals and that quick rice, we certainly were able to capitalize on that with consumers wanting to prepare meals at home more. So we focused in on that in Australia, and here in Asia, and this was some of the stuff we did with you at Overdose, there was that, you know, desire to look at your health and nutrition. And so we've got our the Sunrise had this low GI product that in a rice. And, you know, we decided to switch the focus to that product during the last couple of years, more so than the snack, you know, for various reasons. But, you know, one of them was that health focus that was certainly coming through from consumers across Singapore and Hong Kong.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? That was, I think, such a strong insight in terms of a signal of intent from consumers in terms of what they're looking for. And quite a good way to cut through in a relative, you know, I guess what you could describe as a bit of a commodity. I mean, I know you would say rice isn't just rice. There's obviously lots of nuances there. But yeah, you know, it's still an everyday purchase, so it's interesting to be able to pick up on that as a key differentiator. We have a question here from Raven. So, yeah, BAM milk. For those outside Southeast Asia, what does this taste like? Can you talk about what triggered the launch of this product? Alternative milk products are well sought after these days. I must admit, I've never tasted it. I'm more of a soy boy person myself. But,
A soy boy. Well, okay. So look, I'll do this somewhat brief, and I may not do it all justice. And this is why I think it'd be good to come back to this, because there is a bigger answer to this. But I spoke around what if and the idea that sustainability is not enough, and we have to regenerate. And so, what if does is focus on what we call future fit crops. So crops that maybe we may not have used in the past. Yeah. So at the moment, most of what we eat from a crop perspective is sort of rice, oats, soy, wheat, roughly those four things 80, 90% of the time. And that's created a monoculture in agriculture, which has meant that we've gone to GMO foods and using more fertilizers to keep the yields up. And basically all those crops take a lot of nutrients out of the soil. So if we want
it's almost
to
like
do
a
more,
non-virtuous circle.
that's right. And sustainability is, can we, what we have today, can we continue to provide those resources in the future? Like, don't deplete the resources. Well, we're depleting them. We'll continue to. So we've got to do more than just sustainability. We have to regenerate. Right? You have to add back in to get at least back to where we were. So Bambara nut is a legume. It's a crop that's been grown in Southeast Asia and Africa for generations. And often they use it just as a cereal, they make it into bread. They can eat it and things in these environments. And we are, our founder, Chris, identified this Bambara nut as an opportunity to put into the ground, because when you put it in the ground, it puts nutrients back in the ground. It also uses significantly less water than the likes of soy, and particularly almond and oat. Less greenhouse emissions, can grow in arid environments, so it doesn't need a lot of water, and can be utilized to turn into products like the milk, like the noodles, and some other cool things that we're working on at the moment. It's high in natural fiber, it's high in natural protein. And the other thing, because it's not part of the monoculture of agriculture, oat, almond, etc., soy, it's got a lot of micronutrients that we're not used to having, which are good for us, which we need, again, around sustainability and regeneration. So we've launched this product. It's in cold storage and fair price online, our website, etc. WhatIF. And we've just started to reformulate a little bit these milks. We've got a light, an airy and everyday kind of product and a barista version. And what does it taste like? It's a little bit like oat, but a bit more nutty. And what we've tried to do with our reformulation, again, all natural, no added nasties, is to make it as close to milk as possible, that creaminess and that familiarity of milk, so that, you can use it either on cereal on its own, or use it for, your coffees, and, not have to change your lifestyle that much. Yeah. But at the same time, you're contributing to this concept of regeneration, which is sustainability plus, I guess. So yeah, the new formulation, it should be in Singapore stores soon. Buy it online, have a look. And we're just testing it now with some baristas as well around Singapore, maybe do that in Australia to see how it goes as well. But I like the taste. I used to be a soy boy, then I moved to an oat. And this is pretty good and great fiber, more protein than the rest of them. And lots of other cool stuff. So yeah, I guess that's my what if plug, but a long answer to the BAM nut story.
No, a very interesting answer. And I think from Raven's, thanks for the question, Raven. From Raven's perspective, when will it be available in New Zealand?
Well, good question. Well, the Kiwis are really particular about milk as in dairy industry. So our initial partners there were scared, right? It's like being scared of the All Blacks. They didn't want to touch it right yet. And we needed to.
I don't know if you need to be scared of them anymore, but I'm going to get flamed.
No, you don't actually. We're actually in Ireland. Speaking of that, we're about to go to Ireland, I think.
Nice.
Anyway, the noodles. So the noodles we've got, the instant noodles are coming out. They should have just arrived with our partners there, and they will start to distribute that. We had to reformulate the milk to add a bit more protein from I won't get into that. It comes down to labeling rules in Australia and New Zealand. So that looks like it's going to happen, and we'd look at bringing milk into New Zealand when our partners are ready to do so, and the dairy industry is accepting of it. But the noodles, yeah, for sure, a great source of protein, good, just goodness, and you can check it all out online and start to follow on Instagram, etc.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to sampling those. For anyone just joining us, this is episode 99 of Overdose and Chill Live. So I'm Yestin Keys, Managing Director for Overdose Southeast Asia. And today we have Rupert Dyer, Commercial Director, APAC of WhatIF Foods. Do hit us up for questions. Obviously very happy to answer any questions in the comments. And you can also find us on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. So Rupert, I think we talked a bit about WhatIF and the sustainability side of things, and we touched on some of the challenges during the pandemic in terms of supply chain and so on. What are your observations on post-pandemic supply chain? Because I think the pandemic it hasn't finished proper, I guess, but it's kind of petering out hopefully. But there hasn't really been a kind of big, okay, everything's back to normal now. There's actually been quite a lot of knock-on effect, and I think particularly in the supply chain space.
Yeah, and in food and energy, as we're all aware. So I think it's right now that we say we've got the pandemic, we've got the conflict happening in Ukraine, and we've also got the impact of climate change. And some of them are new, and some of them have always been with us. But my view is, they're all coming together now as one. At various degrees, and I guess the silver lining for them all coming together like this is that it's going to force companies, consumers, anybody involved in this, governments, to accelerate the change that's needed towards sustainability or regeneration or whatever bucket you want to put it in, but generally just to do things better and smarter. We're on this massive path for globalization, with massive interconnected supply chains, which drove down costs and all sorts of things, which, people have different views on. And that was great to a degree, but it also then showed if things go wrong, it's not so great. And executing globalization at its most efficient that you would learn at an MBA school is much, much harder now with impact of the pandemic, conflicts like Ukraine, and certainly the impact of climate change, which is real and happening. So more floods, more droughts, more fire. You can only just see it there, right?
Yeah.
And so executing globalization is harder, and companies involved with globalization, moving things around, manufacturing things in one country, transporting it, transforming it into another, into a saleable product in another country, and then shipping that to a third country to actually sell it, it's harder. And so I think anyone involved in that needs to think differently. And it's no different to, the Industrial Revolution, the advent of the internet, and, digitization. If you don't think differently, if you don't adapt, then you're most likely not going to be as successful, right? So that's, the challenge for everybody to be involved is to think about it end to end. Where do you have to do things differently, but still offer a product or a service that, as functional, is cost reasonable, right? And pitched right at that. But also then now with consumers demanding that you are socially conscious, environmentally conscious, and healthy, you've got those three pillars as well. So, at the end of the pandemic, probably not lingering effects, but if we want to look at it from a silver lining with all those other three things that I mentioned, I think it's going to accelerate doing things better, and that may mean more localized production of certain crops. It might mean farmers that used to grow this variety of corn or something might look at another variety that uses less water, right? That uses less fertilizer. Then they also might look at ones that yield more, so you get more tons, more output per square meter of land. Yeah. They might look at options in the factory where you use less inputs around energy, around packaging, all of that. They might look at growing things in areas they haven't grown before, such as this bambara nut, that then allows you to localize your supply chain a little bit more, so that it doesn't expose you as much to long distances of travel and any interruption that may have. So across the supply chain, there's lots and lots of examples of where companies are trying their best and trying to think differently.
Yeah, and I think, we touched on, obviously sustainability is a huge part of all of that, and we touched on that earlier, but just then you talked about changing consumer attitudes in terms of consumer expectations of what brands or manufacturers should and shouldn't be doing, how products should and shouldn't affect both the consumer and the environment around them. When with looking ahead to what if, what are the trends that you're seeing there? That perhaps what if is obviously, I wouldn't say capitalising on, because that sounds like sounds like they've kind of plotted to be there at the right time, but it's obviously very meaningful for what if in terms of what if's proposition and product range.
Yeah. I think we particularly with the Gen Zs and that the younger generation in particular. You can see this with the way that certain elections have gone recently in the likes of Australia and even the one in the US a few years ago. That the voice of that consumer from Gen Z to, I forget, the Millennials, and then wherever it is, everyone basically, the younger, less than 50 odd or 60 odd, I don't want to offend anyone, have a bigger voice. Bottom line is they have a bigger voice. And that voice is clearly showing that that if we continue the way we're doing, we're not happy with that. And if we continue the way we're doing, that makes me anxious. And I want people to do something about it. And I'm either going to show that by voting differently, or by buying different products, or working for different companies that I am aligned to. And, that momentum has started. And I think really only in the last 5 odd years we've seen that. And it's sort of started to accelerate. And with everything we just spoke about with COVID, et cetera, I think it's, even more accelerating. And we see big impact with inflation at the moment. A lot of these young, the younger consumers are going a little bit, maybe I told you so. But that's life, and that's what's happened. So, I think companies like WhatIF, there's luck and there's design. I think both things are coming together for businesses that want to address this anxiety around climate change, around the cost of living, around just being better, and better not just for the environment, but better for the communities that grow the food that we eat, and also better health, right? To feel better. Diabetes is a big issue, as we know, for example, heart, all of that. So we've got to eat better. And that falls under that whole bucket of sustainability, I think, across 3 pillars: social, environment, and health. And I think companies that want to really demonstrate them listening to that request and participating in it need to have action across all 3, not just 1 or 2. Maybe 1 or 2 is amped more than the other, but I think you've got to think about it across those 3 things to be truly effective and impactful.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a lot of brands put a lot of effort into the sustainability conversation, but you do suspect sometimes that it's not that it's not sincere, but it's perhaps misplaced in terms of where they're actually focusing on. And I think what I like about WhatIF is that at a fundamental product level, it's really ticking all 3 of those boxes. The business is successful in addressing those 3 areas.
Yeah. And look, it's not easy to do it, right? And you can often find yourself in a niche. And I know, big corporations have shareholders and the need to return, but it's about thinking a bit differently. And we are working in West Africa and in Ghana and Nigeria, particularly in Ghana, directly working with farming communities. And that's an example of us trying to do what we said we'd like to do, is give impact to societies there. So they have a direct contract with us, they supply us, and at the same time we put money back into the community. Recently, I've seen some great photos that may or may not come up through our socials, or of what we're doing in Ghana and rebuilding a couple of schools, and just step by step doing that. And it's got to be commercially right and viable, which is the other thing that we focus on, like anybody. And then if it is and consumers accept the product, then it means that the benefits we're trying to do on a relatively small scale can be larger.
And what I think, you know, recently you've been to a couple of our other events as a I guess as a spectator rather than a participant. But was there anything in terms of some of the content there and some of the things we've been talking about in terms of data and platforms and personalization or addressing post-pandemic consumer expectations and behaviors and so on? Is there anything in any of those that kind of stood out to you as something that perhaps might be relevant moving forward, or in the scheme of some of the things we've talked about? Just, I guess, from your perspective as a self-professed non-digital native.
Well, I did discover that every time I went to an event, I probably understood 20% of what was being told to me. And when I asked someone what your job is, I probably knew 5% of that. But that might be the same if I explain my old boring dinosaur supply chain, containers, trucks, trains, boats, and factories. But I think ultimately it's all the same, right? You know, you're providing a product, you're providing a service, and as you peel the onion back on certain things or certain industries, I discovered that there's lots there, right? And everybody has their part to play, and all those people have to play their part to be ultimately successful. So, one thing I learned there was that, there's not a one size fits all shop you can lob up to, really. And that does rely on partnerships. And then also you need that to align with where you are as a brand at the time, how complex, you want to be, what your supply chain is like, what your touch points are. Are you selling online only, or are you trying to do both through an omni-channel kind of strategy? How much money do you have to throw at it? And what kind of story do you want to tell? Are you going to over-index on the environment and under-index on taste and nutrition? That may or may not work. And then how do you get that message across so that it's clear and concise, but also trying to demonstrate, if you're a brand, that you are trying to be effective across multiple avenues of being a good corporate citizen. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah.
Yeah, it does, because obviously, at Overdose, we're very much focused on the digital commerce side of things, but and helping consumers find what they're looking for and so on and so forth. But obviously, all of those products are still kind of coming from that same supply chain and same planet as all the other products are coming from. So I think there isn't really any separating the two. What about outside of work? I mean, I probably know some of these answers, but for those watching, and obviously, again, some of these we talked about in terms of kind of wellness and everything else. De-stressing is a huge part of life for all of us in terms of how we kind of decompress outside of work. What are the things that work for you?
Good question, and timely. I guess I was fortunate enough to take the last 2.5 months off in between roles, and part of that, I was also fortunate enough to go to a sort of a yoga meditation retreat, which, if people are interested, you can ask me later on about that and where it was. But it was recommended by a friend, and the reason I went is I felt that I didn't have that balance, right? I was a little bit rush, and I could notice that I wasn't, fully present all the time. And I went not just for a good stretch, which I got doing the yoga, but also to try and pick up a couple of tools that might help me address the fact that I was a bit rush, a bit not present. And I did. I picked up a few tools. Not everything was right for me, and that's the case with these kind of things. But the biggest shift that I've done now to try and get that balance back is I get up a little bit earlier, and during that period of time, half an hour to 45 minutes, I'm on my own, and most of the family's still asleep. And I use that time to do a little bit of meditation. Again, I'm very much a beginner on this, but time for myself to think, reflect, what do I want to get out of today? And then just, get all the other thoughts that are unnecessary out of my head. So I do a bit of that, a bit of yoga, and basically just try to start the day on my terms with myself and time for myself. So that means you should have time for others later on in the day, as opposed to alarm goes off, breakfast, shower, clean your teeth, yell at the kids, and you're doing that while you're looking at Instagram, Facebook, emails, blah, 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 and answering at the same time. And then everybody goes out the door and it's 9 o'clock, it's your first meeting. You go, oh shit, sorry, what's just happened? So that's the biggest change that I've done. And I'm trying to stick to it. A bit of exercise and all of that stuff comes into it as well, as you'd know, Yeston. But for me, they were the sort of little tidbits and tools that I picked up, and they're working at the moment.
Which is awesome, and I think a lot of the challenges you described, we're all kind of dealing with them. It's an ever more connected world, and we're I guess required to be ever more productive, and then there's home life to balance with that as well. But how are you? Because we've talked about this obviously outside of this forum, but how are you kind of? Is it hard to maintain that? Obviously, you've got the tools that work for you, that it's proven, but do you find that you need additional strategies to keep them in place, or kind of protect that ring fence, or is it just a case if you get up before everyone else does, that's job done?
Well, I mean, some people are not morning people, so that's why I mean you've got to pick things that work for you as well, right? Like anything, I think anyone that's done this sort of 360-degree feedback around your personality, right, who you are, it always comes back. Doesn't matter how many times over the last 20 years of my career I've done this, it comes back to the same kind of thing, who you are. And you can't necessarily change that, but what you can do is pick out the things that you're good at, right, and make you feel better, and over-index on them in trying to control your emotions, good emotions and bad emotions. So for example, if you're feeling and frustrated and anxious about something, you need something to tell you are anxious and frustrated. So just stop, take a breath, and then utilize maybe some of the tools that you pick up, whether it's yoga, whether it's going for a run, a swim, a bike. You've got to be conscious and aware of that because we are who we are and our personalities don't really change. But certain things will trigger us differently to others, and you've just got to be aware that you're being triggered. And when that's happening, either yourself or your partner or a good friend can also tell you. I've certainly had that. And then switch into, okay, what kind of tools can I use to just, address that and move on and feel better about it. So that's sort of what I do. I'm someone that likes to go. I'm kind of a D on whatever that DIS thing is, and push and drive. And I want to make sure that I'm not always doing that, and address it when I know I am doing it too much.
It's very, very good advice. Almost guru level. I'm impressed. I think I should definitely be paying attention anyway. But back to the products, and question from Azani. What's your favourite WhatIF product?
Well, it's a little bit of a coin toss at the moment because there's really only two. We've got some other stuff there. I think these instant noodles are really cool. I got a great health benefit. They're air dried. They're not deep fried. So there's no palm oil in them. So that's a big tick. And also no need for the palm oil industry to keep cutting down forests and all that business. They're really high in protein, naturally, fiber. So all of that good stuff. And then when you eat it, you can either choose to use the sauce we've got, or you can add your own stuff. The protein in it is actually equivalent to about 2 eggs. So if you add another 2 eggs on top of it with a bit of soy sauce, there you got 4 eggs, and it's only lunchtime. So I think that's a really neat, cool product and an example of looking at things across all the supply chain, from who grew it, how we manufacture it, and then what does it mean for the consumer.
I think it's great to see, because it actually restores a bit of faith that it is possible to do. To have that level of responsibility and sustainability, but to have it at a mass production level, in something like a pack of noodles, it's very easy to say, here's a $10,000 table that's been sustainably sourced, but obviously that's not happening at scale. So therefore the impact is probably not that impressive either.
Yeah, and look, we're on a relatively small scale, but as we scale up, we can see how costs can come down. Obviously, with all the things we spoke about, energy, et cetera, cost of energy, cost of oil, cost of food, cost of things, all of those inputs that are traditionally in the instant noodle space are going up as well. So, this is an example of thinking differently and reimagining a category.
I've got a question for you. So, do you think? And obviously, I'm sure as you progress at WhatIF, you'll eat more and more WhatIF products. Do you think that's going to reduce your 5K time even further? Are you going to get even quicker?
Absolutely, 100%. That's the only way it's going to get faster, by eating WhatIF products. And looking better.
People watching, it's already pretty quick.
All of that, yeah.
Another product. Another question for relating to WhatIF. So from Luke, what are you seeing as key channels for WhatIF to connect with customers right now? Or what do you? I guess you're still quite early. So what do you think are going to be those key channels?
Yeah, I'm quite early. Look, like anything, we're a new brand, and we're also in categories at the moment with alternate milk and instant noodles that aren't necessarily not competitive, right? They're very competitive. So cutting through all of that's a challenge, and telling the story. So you people who've listened today have heard me tell the story, and right now as a business we're also working on ways that we can tell that story in an even more efficient and enlightened way that does allow people to buy into the story, understand it, and buy into the brand. And again, back to what I said, I think with China and the rest of it is understand why we do what we do and build that connection to the brand. So telling that story is a challenge because it's new. Not many companies are talking about regeneration. Some people don't know what is that, and that's all new. So educating the consumers around that storyline is the challenge as well.
Which is exciting as well, because even though it's as you say, it's not an established narrative. It's an extremely important narrative and an extremely interesting narrative. So I think if you can get it out there in the right way, you can get a lot of interest and a lot of engagement. So yeah, another question from Azadi. So chance to showcase
What is Bam Nut in Mandarin? I don't know, but we will figure that out at one point. Once the borders reopen, I'll learn it.
There you go. You heard it here. Well, listen, Rupert, unless there's any more questions coming in, I don't think there are. It's been awesome to chat to you, sorry. Really interesting stuff. I think lots of exciting things to come with WhatIF Foods. So certainly looking forward to kind of following your progress there. And yeah, it's been great to have you with us on Overdose and Chill Live.
It's been awesome here speaking with you and everyone else. And thank you for the opportunity to come online and have a chat. It's the first time I've done this, so hopefully it was okay. And more than happy to come back if your listeners are willing to have me back.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thanks for taking the time, and we will definitely, it'd be good to catch up again in 6 months and see how things are going, and hopefully pick up some more insights from you.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rupert.